Online and in-person group gathered this past week to look at this chapter, Chapter 2, Strange Stories, Spiritual Sight, and Blind Guides. This is a synopsis of what we learned together. I'm going to have a lot of questions for you, so you may want to be ready to pause the clip every once in a while. The first thing I need to do is tell you it'd be a really good idea for you to get a copy of the story The Wolf of Gubbio. It's one of the Franciscan legends, and it's a good story. It's got many versions. I'm going to give you, and I'm sorry, this is a spoiler alert, a synopsis. Gubbio is a small town in Italy where a wolf has come to live, and it is killing and eating people. The people don't know what to do to get rid of the wolf. It's even killing the hunters that they send after it. So they try to figure out all sorts of things to do, and they send for a holy man, St. Francis. Francis helps them through a rather surprising methodology to keep the wolf, call the wolf their brother. I'm really cutting this short. The story is great for all the details of what they want to try and do to the wolf and what they think Francis should help them do. But he convinces them to call the wolf brother. And so afterwards, when they're traveling around, people say, "Oh, you're from Gubbio? Don't you have a wolf?" They say, "Yes, we have a brother wolf, and we feed it." Now, the images that are powerful in the story are many, and when I asked people what stuck with them, they said things like the wolf coming down a narrow street and a door opening and light coming out onto the cobblestones, and someone pushing a plate of food out onto the street and then closing the door. The darkness of the town and the alleyways, the dark forest, and the dark side of the people who wanted to send the wolf to another town. How these were perfect people in a perfect place, contending with a shadow in shadowy streets. I asked folks what meaning stuck with them, and they said, feeding the wolf, how one brave person encouraged everyone else, how it was so easy to blame the stranger first, the discovery that they might be the cause of the problem, particularly that we sometimes have to pay attention to the things that frighten us, even today. Also, sometimes that the simplest solution is the right one. Feed the wolf. Oh, no, feed your wolf, not the wolf. Because we all have dark and frightening things within us. It is fear and not understanding that drives us sometimes. So, for example, one of the wolves we think we want to drive out of town in Toronto are safe injection sites. They are the wolves we are afraid of, and yet these are our neighbors who need these safe places, and we need to care for them, to feed them. What does it mean to call a wolf brother? To see something threatening from a different perspective. Like people on the ropes and those who are angry and frustrated at the disintegration of the familiar, and they take it out on others or do irrational things. Sometimes our identity incorporates our fear. I am a person who fears. How does that help me day to day? And how does that affect the way I treat others? Do I take a step back and try to understand what is happening, or at least allow that I may not understand what is happening? Shea will talk about spiritual masters and their discovery of spiritual sight and how they do it through strange stories. Like Jesus' parables, and in particular the parable of the talents, where we have often been taught that the moral of the story is that we should invest so we get a huge return for our master. That's what we should be doing as part of the church. We should be reaping huge rewards for the sake of our obedience to God and our following of Jesus. And the real point of the story was the hero. Sorry, you might not be familiar with the story. A king calls 3 of his servants and says, here is some money, go invest it, and I want you to make a good return. You've got a year. And one gets $5,000 and returns with $5,000 more, and one gets $3,000 and returns with $3,000 more, and one gets $1,000 and buries it in the ground. In Jesus' day, they would have understood that the last guy was the hero because he took that money out of circulation. And the people who made so much money, the 2 servants who made a killing, would have had to do so at the expense of others. Nobody doubles their money in a year without it costing somebody else. So the good and faithful servants, Jesus is saying tongue-in-cheek, the one who made a difference is the one who did not invest money that hurt others, but did give it back at the end of the year. The infancy narratives of Jesus are another strange story. If you read the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, you will read all of these begats, how so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so, to set up a lineage, a Jesus family tree, if you will. And it's interesting that 4 women are mentioned, and they are all women of questionable virtue. Tamar, who had to seduce her father-in-law in order to be obedient to the law. Too long to explain, you'll have to look it up. And Rahab, who ran a bordello and looked after the spies and hid them in Jericho so they could escape and tell the people of Israel how easy it was going to be to take down Jericho, but also make sure that Rahab survived. Ruth, who had to get a little too familiar with her distant relative Boaz in order for him to see that she was worthy of marriage after she was a widow. Again, read the story. When she uncovers his feet, that's not what she's uncovering. And finally, Bathsheba, who at some point have been thought to have been the seductress of King David. These 4 are part of the genealogy of Jesus, which led to one author writing a book called The Prostitute in the Family Tree. And when I talked about this to other ministers, you would be surprised at how many of us had somebody like that in our family tree. It is the strange stories that bring to light new possibilities, and how the Holy One works through not necessarily the people we would have picked. How does that affect how we behave? How does that shape our narrative? It might lead us to some action of kindness. It might affect the way we treat every child we teach. It might shock us when someone who is on the ropes is generous with us. How we treat the black sheep in our family. Strangeness in a story moves us to deeper ambition, to be better people who have a better understanding of what the light is around us. He will talk about the mystical rose. All the petals are separate, but they are united in a common center. And it is for us to look for commonalities and overlaps. Chrysostom talks about heaven and earth commingling in the Christmas story, the holy and the base, the divine and the human. But the word commingle means to mix together without losing essential nature. We partake of the reality of God. And if nothing else, for me, Christmas is the story of how the incarnation is God saying, here, take this, and handing us a baby. And we have to decide what to do. We can't put it down. We have to decide what to do, how to protect it, how to nurture it. And that is the way we should treat every other human being. God hands people to us, says the Christmas story, and says, here, take this and look after this person for me. On page 66, Shea writes, about the strangeness of Christmas and its message, but how important it is to pay attention. So the narratives are full of the word behold. Behold, you will be reduced to silence. Here's Zechariah. Behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Behold, an angel of the Lord came to Joseph in a dream. Behold, the star they had seen at its rising went before them. Behold, the virgin will be with child. Behold, I announce to you good news of great joy, which will be for all people. Look, what do you see in the Christmas story? What does Christmas open up to you as a possibility? How do these stories change your way of seeing? When I first asked the folks this question, I got silence. And silence is a good response. And then some people told the story of how Christmas Eve had families coming from all over and the church filled up, and their best moment was seeing a dad cradling a newborn child while they sang Silent Night. How three churches came together, three churches that did not necessarily get along, but on Christmas Eve they shared worship. A child going to the creche after the Christmas Eve service, talking to Jesus and worrying that he was cold, wrapping the doll in a scarf. Seeing people in church that we had an influence on, even if it's only once a year at Christmas Eve. Shea tells us that these stories should help us to see differently. They make no sense. A 90-year-old woman is pregnant. A virgin is pregnant. A king is bothered by the birth of some infants in a very small town that people would have to travel across country to be counted. None of it makes sense. None of it, no matter how we try, there's either a need for us to dismiss the story or to try to figure out what it's about. But we learn to see through the lens of myth, to say this story may or may not be true, but I know something like this happened, and the story changes me. And so I asked the groups, when was the last time that Christmas thrilled you? When was the last time it jolted you? One said, when I saw it through my 2-year-old granddaughter's eyes for the first time. Another said, it jolted me to see the children I taught in Sunday school as adults in church at Christmas time. One night coming home after the Christmas Eve service, it's cold and it's clear. We're still under a full moon, and all I can feel is stillness. Facing terrible health challenges right at Christmas time, and help was not readily available. And yet there were these Christmas angels, neighbors, who came with food and gifts, and then kept doing it for 15 years. What is it to want the perfect Christmas? And why is it that we remember the imperfect ones? They all blur together, except when something goes wrong, or we cast our minds back to our childhood. We remember those Christmases when we're not wrapped up in the distractions of busyness and responsibility. In the Starlight this week, I invite you to remember, when was the last time Christmas jolted you? What was it like for you as a child? And how do you see the world and yourself differently than you did then? And how does how you saw yourself then help you look at the world differently now? Thank you for joining us. I hope you'll be with us next time. I hope you will like this video. I hope you'll check out the rest of our videos on YouTube. Consider subscribing. Check out our webpage, fairlawnchurch.ca, for lots more great stuff, especially if you're looking for a welcoming place to gather this Christmas season. Be good to you.